imaginary. Number 16, find the absolute value of the complex number. Your absolute value of a complex number, your formula is, if you've got a plus bi, you want to take the square root of a squared plus b squared. So for us, our a is 3, our b is negative 9. So our absolute value is going to be the square root of 3 squared is 9, negative 9 quantity squared, so plus negative 9 squared. That negative 9 quantity squared gets you a positive 81. So 81 plus 9, 90. But go figure, we can reduce that radical. We are able to break out a 9, so we're left with 3 radical 10d. Number 17, solve by completing the squares. So, excuse me, this is section 4.7. Remember, the thing I said over and over and over was find half of b and square it. So your b term is always going to be the coefficient of your x. So for us, in this case, it is 12. So everything else stays the same. X squared plus 12x minus 2 equals 0. Half of b, half of 12 is 6. Take it and square it, 36. So you add in 36 and then immediately subtract it because you can't change the value. Those first 3 terms are always going to factor into x and then plus or minus that half of b. Our b, half of b, was positive 6. So x plus 6 quantity squared. Then we combine our like terms here. Oh, minus 38 equals 0. From here we can solve using square roots. Add 38 to both sides. X plus 6 squared equals positive 38. Square root both sides. X plus 6 equals the positive or negative square root of 38. The last thing you need to get rid of is that plus 6. You'll do it by subtraction. So you have a, x equals negative 6 plus or minus radical 38. Number 18, solve by completing the square. Same idea, take half of b and square it, add it in, then immediately subtract it. So you have x squared plus 6x minus 11 equals negative 23. Your b value this time around is 6. Half of that is 3. 3 squared is 9. So you have plus 9 minus 9. Those first 3 terms become x plus 3 quantity squared. That is a perfect square trinomial. You can go back to your notes from section 4.3 when we talked about our perfect square trinomials. X plus 3 quantity squared. Those next 2 terms, minus 20, equals negative 23. When you add 20 to both sides, you're left with x plus 3 squared equals negative 3. Our answer is going to be imaginary, which is fine. Just know that ahead of time. We take the positive and negative square root of both sides. X plus 3 equals plus or minus radical negative 3. But remember, when you take the square root of a negative number, you can immediately pull it out and call it I. So I radical 3. Your last step is to subtract 3 from both sides. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus I root 3. Option A. Number 19, solve by completing the square. This is a different problem than what you have in your yellow sheet. Go to Plan Book to see the new problem in your new multiple choice options. Also, it's right here. How convenient. So when we solve this one, you want to start by factoring out that a value because we only like to complete the square when our leading coefficient is 1. So we factor our 2, our leading coefficient, out of just our first 2 terms. Now, when we do, we're left with a fraction, which is fine. So x squared minus, well, if you take that 3 and divide by 2, you can call it 3/2 x. Then I'm going to leave some space. Everything else stays. Plus 4 equals 0. Now, when we take half of this b value, I want to take half of 3 over 2. Oh, 3/4. I take half of b and then I square it. I distribute the squared to my top and bottom. I'm going to add in, 9 over 16, and then immediately subtract it out. Your first 3 terms inside parentheses are going to factor to become that x plus half of b, so x, or plus or minus, sorry. So 3/2. When we took half of that, we got 3/4. So our 2 out front stays. Those 3 terms become x minus 3/4 quantity squared. Oops, quantity. And then don't forget that you need to multiply your term that you factored out by that number that you immediately added and then subtracted in. So you have to take 2 times negative 9/16 to find out, oh, I need to subtract out 9/8. And then you've still got that plus 4 equals 0. Your negative 9/8 plus 4, those are going to combine to become 23/8. How fun. And positive. So then you've got 2 times x minus 3/4 squared plus 23/8 equals 0. You solve by square roots. So you're going to subtract 23/8 from both sides. 2 times x minus 3/4 squared equals negative 23/8. Oh, good. Imaginary solutions. So we are going to, excuse me, I like to multiply both sides by the reciprocal since I've got a fraction over here to get rid of that 2 out front. So then I have x minus 3/4 squared equals negative 23/16. Now, when I take the plus or minus square root of both sides, x minus 3/4 equals plus or minus square root of negative 23/16. That'll be fun to work with. So, when you have the square root of a fraction, you can take the square root of the numerator divided by the square root of the denominator. This is actually good news in our case because the square root of 16 is just the nice number 4. In our numerator, the square root of negative 23, we like to have the square root of a positive number, and so we say, well, how about we call I radical 23 and call it good. Our last step to get x by itself is to add 3/4 to both sides. So, great news, it has a common denominator. So, I have technically 3/4 plus or minus I root 23 over 4. But since they have a common denominator, we can write that as one fraction, where our numerator is 3 plus or minus I root 23. Our denominator is just 4. So that is option B. Whew. Fun problem. Lastly, number 20, rewrite it in vertex form and then identify the vertex. We are going to do that by completing the square. So we want, excuse me, to take half of b and then square it, add it in, and then subtract it. Our b this time around is 14. Half of it is 7. That squared is 49. So we are going to add and then subtract it in right away. So I have y equals x squared plus 14x plus 49 minus 49 plus 31. Our first 3 terms factor to become x plus 7 squared, and then we can combine those second 2 terms. Negative 49 plus 31 would be negative 18. And we're done. So that is our parabola in vertex form. Remember that vertex form is y equals a times x minus h. So your vertex is negative 7, negative 18, option D. I hope this helps. Please shoot me an email letting me know that you watched this video or even parts of it because I want to know if you found it useful or if you just ignored it. Good luck studying, good knowledge. I have faith in you all.